Sergeant Karen Blake didn't look like much at first glance. She was barely over 5'3", with a slim build that seemed more suited for someone working behind a desk than a tough, demanding patrol job. Her auburn hair was always tied neatly into a ponytail, and her bright hazel eyes carried a calmness that disarmed people before they even spoke to her. But Karen's easy smile and approachable demeanor hid something most didn't notice right away: a core of pure steel. In Rivertown, where small talk was as common as the dusty streets and the sound of church bells on Sunday, Karen was well known. Not for being loud, flashy, or imposing like some officers, but for her unshakable presence. To most people, she was just another patrol officer, cruising quietly through the town's winding roads, keeping the peace like the dozens of officers before her. But to those who really knew her, her colleagues, her friends, even her few but fierce enemies, Karen Blake was anything but ordinary. Karen wasn't the kind of person to flaunt her authority. She didn't need to. Her strength didn't come from the badge on her chest or the uniform she wore, but from something deeper. She had a knack for staying calm in chaos, for reading people like an open book, and for standing her ground when most would walk away. She had built a reputation for getting the job done, no matter how tough or impossible it seemed. And while she never looked for trouble, trouble had a way of finding her. On this particular Friday evening, the air was warm, and the setting sun painted the sky in soft shades of pink and orange. The streets of Rivertown were unusually quiet, a peaceful end to a long week. Karen sat in her patrol car, parked near the edge of town where the highway stretched into the horizon. She sipped her coffee, letting the radio chatter fill the silence as she kept an eye on the passing cars. It seemed like an ordinary evening. The kind of evening where nothing much happens, where the biggest problem might be a stray dog wandering into someone's yard or a teenager caught speeding. But Karen had learned long ago that ordinary could change in an instant. Her radio crackled to life, breaking the stillness. Unit 327, possible disturbance reported near Oakwood gas station. Group of motorcyclists loitering and causing a nuisance. Witness says they've been harassing customers. Over. Karen straightened in her seat, setting her coffee in the cup holder. This is 327, I'm nearby. I'll check it out. Over. She put the car into gear, her mind already running through the possibilities. Rivertown wasn't known for biker gangs, but every now and then, groups would pass through on their way to bigger cities. Usually, they were loud but harmless, looking for a place to refuel and stretch their legs. But sometimes, they were more than that: reckless, dangerous, and itching for a fight. Karen had dealt with both kinds before, and she knew better than to assume which one she was about to face. As she turned onto the highway, the low, guttural rumble of motorcycle engines reached her ears. It started as a faint hum, but as she approached the gas station, it grew into a deafening roar. Karen's sharp eyes scanned the scene. A group of 6 bikers had taken over the small lot, their bikes lined up in a messy row near the pumps. They weren't just filling up and leaving, they were lounging, laughing loudly, and drawing attention from the handful of people trying to go about their evening. Karen pulled into the lot and parked her car a few spaces away, taking a moment to assess the situation. The bikers were all wearing matching black leather jackets with skull insignias on the back, their outfits adorned with chains and patches that suggested they belonged to some kind of club. They were big, burly men with an air of cocky arrogance, the kind of men who thrived on intimidation. One of them was leaning against his bike, a cigarette dangling from his lips as he watched a young couple hurry out of the gas station with their heads down. Another had his helmet off, shaking out his long hair and laughing loudly at something one of his buddies said. Karen noticed a third man standing near the entrance, holding the door open for another biker who was coming out with a 6-pack of beer in his hand. None of them seemed particularly dangerous at first glance, but Karen knew better than to trust appearances. She'd seen how quickly situations like this could escalate. All it took was one wrong move, one comment taken the wrong way, and the whole scene could turn into chaos. Karen stepped out of her car, her boots hitting the pavement with a quiet but firm thud. She adjusted her utility belt, making sure her radio, flashlight, and other tools were in place. She didn't reach for her weapon, it wasn't that kind of situation. Not yet. As she approached the group, the man with the cigarette noticed her first. He nudged the guy next to him and jerked his head in her direction. Karen caught the look they exchanged, a mix of amusement and disdain. They weren't taking her seriously, not yet. "Evening, gentlemen," Karen said, her voice calm but authoritative. "Everything okay here?" The man with the cigarette blew out a puff of smoke, smirking. "Oh, we're just fine, officer. No need to worry about us." Karen kept her expression neutral, her eyes steady as she looked around the group. "I've had a call about some disturbance here. Customers feeling uncomfortable. Mind telling me what's going on?" Another biker, the one with the six-pack, laughed and held up his beer. "Just grabbing some refreshments, officer." "Is that a crime now?" The others chuckled, their laughter echoing in the otherwise quiet lot. Karen didn't join in. "I'm not here to give you a hard time," she said evenly. "But if people are feeling unsafe, I need to make sure there's no trouble. How about you finish up here and move along?" The man with the cigarette took a step closer, his smirk widening. He towered over Karen, his leather jacket creaking as he moved. "And what if we're not ready to leave? You gonna make us?" Karen didn't flinch. She stood her ground, her eyes locking onto his with an intensity that made him hesitate for just a second. "Let's not make this harder than it needs to be," she said, her voice firm. "I'm asking politely. Don't make me ask again." The biker stared at her, his smirk fading slightly. The others watched, waiting to see what he would do. Karen could feel the tension building, the air thick with unspoken challenges. Finally, he shrugged and stepped back, raising his hands in mock surrender. "All right, officer. We'll play nice." Karen nodded, her posture relaxing just enough to show she wasn't looking for a fight, but she wasn't letting her guard down either. As she turned to walk back to her car, she could hear their muffled laughter and whispered comments. "She thinks she's tough," one of them said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Karen didn't react. She climbed into her patrol car and pulled out of the lot, parking just down the street where she could still keep an eye on them. She wasn't going to push them, not yet. She'd given them a chance to do the right thing, and now she was going to see if they took it. But as the minutes ticked by and the bikers showed no sign of leaving, Karen felt her patience thinning. They were testing her, and she knew it. What they didn't know was that Karen Blake never backed down from a challenge. That warm Friday evening was about to take a turn no one could have predicted. Karen leaned back in her seat, her eyes fixed on the gas station as the bikers lingered. They weren't doing much, just hanging out, laughing, revving their engines now and then, but there was something about the way they moved, the way they claimed the space like they owned it, that made Karen's instincts buzz. It wasn't just the arrogance or the noise, it was the subtle way they made everyone else uncomfortable. An older man who'd just finished pumping gas walked hurriedly to his car, glancing over his shoulder at the bikers as if he expected one of them to follow him. A young mother with her toddler hesitated near the entrance of the convenience store, her eyes darting toward the group before she decided it wasn't worth the risk and turned back to her car. Karen noted each reaction, her jaw tightening. This wasn't just a group of travelers passing through. They wanted attention. They thrived on making others feel small, on testing limits to see how far they could push before someone pushed back. Karen reached for her radio. 3-7 to dispatch, she said, keeping her voice low. Go ahead, 3-7. I'm still monitoring the situation at Oakwood gas station. Group of 6 motorcyclists, lingering and causing unease. No overt criminal behavior yet, but I'm requesting a unit for backup if they don't disperse soon. Copy that, 3-7. Nearest unit is 10 minutes out. Do you need immediate assistance? Karen glanced back at the group, watching as one of the bikers tossed an empty soda can onto the ground without a second thought. Negative for now. I'll keep you updated. Over. She hung up the mic and tapped her fingers against the steering wheel. 10 minutes could feel like an eternity in situations like this, but Karen wasn't worried. She'd dealt with worse on her own before. Still, she hoped she wouldn't need to escalate things. The bikers showed no signs of leaving. If anything, they seemed to be getting bolder. The man with the cigarette had started pacing near the pumps, his boots scuffing against the concrete as he gestured animatedly to his friends. Another biker stood on the seat of his motorcycle, arms spread wide as if daring someone to challenge him. Karen sighed. It was time to intervene again. She stepped out of her patrol car, adjusting her belt and squaring her shoulders. Her boots clicked against the pavement as she approached the group, her calm but steady demeanor radiating authority. "Gentlemen," she called out, her voice cutting through the noise of their engines. "We talked about this already. I need you to wrap it up and move along." The biker standing on his seat turned to look at her, a grin spreading across his face. "Officer Small fries back. Thought you gave up on us." The others laughed, their voices echoing across the empty lot. Karen didn't respond to the jab. She knew better than to take the bait. Instead, she stopped a few feet away from the group, her hands resting lightly on her hips. "You've had plenty of time to fuel up and grab your drinks," she said evenly. "It's time to let other customers use the station without feeling intimidated." One of the bikers, a tall man with a shaved head and a long scar running down his cheek, stepped forward. He crossed his arms over his chest, his biceps straining against the leather of his jacket. "And what if we're not ready to leave?" he said, his voice low and challenging. Karen met his gaze without flinching. "Then we have a problem." The scarred man tilted his head, his lips curling into a smirk. "Oh, we've got a tough one here, boys." The group chuckled again, but Karen noticed a flicker of hesitation in the scarred man's eyes. He wasn't used to people standing up to him, least of all someone like Karen, a small, unassuming officer who didn't look like she could take on a group of bikers. But Karen knew appearances could be deceiving. She'd spent years proving that her size and gender didn't make her any less capable than her male colleagues. If anything, they gave her an edge. People underestimated her, and that was their first mistake. "Here's how this is going to go," Karen said, her voice steady. "You're going to pack up and leave. No arguments, no excuses. If you cooperate, you'll be on your way with no trouble. But if you choose to stay, you'll be facing citations for loitering, littering, and any other violations I've observed." The scarred man raised an eyebrow. "You're bluffing." Karen reached for her notepad, flipping it open and clicking her pen. "Am I? Let's see, littering at 7:45 p.m., obstruction of business operations at 7:50 p.m., and public nuisance throughout the last 30 minutes. Want me to keep going?" The man hesitated, his smirk faltering. Karen could see the gears turning in his head. He didn't want to back down in front of his friends, but he also didn't want to risk actual consequences. Before he could respond, the man with the cigarette stepped forward, a playful grin on his face. "Relax, Big Joe. She's just doing her job." He turned to Karen, his tone dripping with mock politeness. "We'll leave, officer." "Sergeant Blake," Karen said, emphasizing her rank. The cigarette man's grin widened. "Sergeant Blake. Well, we wouldn't want to cause you any trouble, would we?" He gestured to his friends. "Come on, boys. Let's hit the road." The group grumbled but began moving toward their bikes. Karen stayed where she was, her eyes following each of them as they mounted their rides. The engines roared to life, and one by one, the bikers pulled out of the lot, their tail lights disappearing down the highway. The cigarette man was the last to leave, pausing for a moment to glance back at Karen. "You've got guts, Sergeant," he said, his voice almost admiring. "Not sure if that's brave or foolish. Guess we'll find out." With that, he revved his engine and sped off, leaving a cloud of dust and exhaust in his wake. Karen watched until the rumble of their bikes faded into the distance. Then she let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She returned to her car and picked up the radio. 3-7 to dispatch, she said. "Situation resolved for now. Subjects have vacated the premises. I'll continue to monitor the area." "Over." "Copy that, 3-7. Good work." "Over." Karen set the radio down and leaned back in her seat. The bikers were gone, but their leader's parting words lingered in her mind. "Guess we'll find out." It was probably nothing, just a final attempt to rattle her. But Karen couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. She turned her gaze back to the highway, scanning the horizon for any sign of trouble. The sun had dipped lower, casting long shadows across the town. The quiet streets felt heavier now, as if the air itself was holding its breath. Karen's instincts were rarely wrong, and tonight, they were telling her one thing: the peace wouldn't last. And when trouble came, she'd be ready. The bikers' mocking words hung in the air as the light turned green. Karen stayed composed, her patrol car rolling forward at a steady pace as the bikers tore ahead, weaving recklessly between vehicles. Their laughter echoed down the road, loud and obnoxious, drawing irritated glances from other drivers. Karen's training had taught her to stay calm under pressure, but moments like this tested her patience. These weren't just thrill-seekers out for a joyride. There was an edge to their behavior, a deliberate attempt to provoke and intimidate. It wasn't the first time she'd seen groups like this, and she doubted it would be the last. Ahead, the bikers veered onto a side street leading to the quieter part of town. Karen's instinct told her to follow, but she hesitated. Technically, they hadn't broken any major laws yet. But she'd seen enough reckless behavior escalate into something worse. With a quick glance at her dashboard camera, she flipped on her turn signal and followed them at a distance. As Karen navigated the winding road, she noticed how the bikers claimed the street as their own. They swerved side by side, taking up both lanes, forcing an approaching car to slow and pull to the shoulder. The driver, a middle-aged man in a pickup truck, leaned out of his window to yell something, but the bikers drowned him out with the deafening roar of their engines. Karen tightened her grip on the wheel. This wasn't just a group of friends out for a ride, they were testing boundaries, daring someone to intervene. The group finally slowed near an old, abandoned gas station on the edge of town. Karen eased her patrol car into a discreet position behind a row of trees, cutting the engine to avoid drawing attention. From here, she had a clear view of the bikers as they dismounted and gathered in a loose circle, their loud voices carrying through the still evening air. "Check this out," one of them said, pulling a bottle from his saddlebag. He smashed it against the pavement, the glass scattering across the cracked concrete. Another biker laughed, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Nice, real classy. Maybe next time, try not to miss the trash can." Karen frowned, her eyes narrowing. They were cocky and destructive, but there was something more to their dynamic. Beneath the banter and bravado, she sensed a pecking order, an unspoken hierarchy that kept the group in line. At the center of it all was the one she'd already pegged as their leader. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a cigarette dangling from his lips and an air of effortless arrogance. He wasn't the loudest, but when he spoke, the others listened. "Let's keep it quick," he said, flicking ash onto the ground. "Cops around here are nosy." Karen's lips twitched into a wry smile. "Nosy, huh?" She reached for her radio, debating whether to call for backup. She was well aware that approaching a group of bikers alone could escalate quickly, but something in her gut told her to wait. For now, she needed to observe. One of the younger bikers, barely out of his teens, tugged at his jacket nervously. "You think that cop from earlier followed us?" The leader shot him a look that silenced him immediately. "Does it matter?" he said, his tone cool and dismissive. "Let 'em try. We'll handle it." Karen raised an eyebrow, leaning forward slightly in her seat. Confident. Overconfident. That was always the flaw in people like him. They thought they were untouchable right up until the moment they weren't. The younger biker mumbled something under his breath, earning a shove from another member of the group. "Stop acting scared," the scarred man growled. "You're making us look bad." Karen noted the tension between them, filing it away. Groups like this thrived on image and dominance, but cracks in their unity could be exploited. As the sun dipped lower on the horizon, the bikers began to spread out, exploring the area around the gas station. One of them kicked at an old tire, sending it rolling across the lot, while another started scrawling something crude on the wall with a marker. Karen decided she'd seen enough. She started her car and flipped on the lights, the red and blue flashes cutting through the dusk. The effect was immediate. The bikers froze, their heads snapping toward her patrol car. Karen stepped out slowly, keeping her movements deliberate as she approached. "Evening, gentlemen," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Having a little get-together, are we?" The leader stepped forward, his cigarette still dangling from his lips. "Something like that," he said, his tone casual. "What's it to you?" Karen tilted her head slightly, meeting his gaze without hesitation. "It's my business when public property starts getting damaged," she said, gesturing to the broken bottle and fresh graffiti. "And when groups like yours make people feel unsafe." The leader smirked, taking a long drag from his cigarette before flicking it onto the ground. "Unsafe? We're just hanging out, officer. Didn't realize that was a crime." Karen ignored the smug tone, her eyes scanning the group. "You're on private property without permission," she said. "That's trespassing. And I'm pretty sure littering and vandalism are crimes, last I checked." One of the bikers, a wiry man with a patchy beard, laughed. "Come on, lady. You're not seriously gonna try to scare us with that, are you?" Karen's expression didn't change. "Not trying to scare you," she said. "Just giving you the facts. Now, you've got two choices. You can clean up your mess and leave, or I can start writing citations. Your call." The leader chuckled, shaking his head. "You've got guts, I'll give you that. But you're outnumbered, officer. You really think you're in a position to make demands?" Karen's heart pounded, but she didn't let it show. Instead, she took a step closer, her eyes locked on his. "I think you'd be surprised what I'm capable of," she said evenly. The leader's smirk faltered for a split second, a small crack in his facade that Karen didn't miss. For a long moment, the two of them stood in silence, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. The other bikers shifted uneasily, glancing between their leader and Karen. Finally, the leader broke the silence. "All right," he said, his tone begrudging. "We'll go. But don't think this is over, Sergeant." Karen didn't respond, her gaze steady as she watched them mount their bikes. One by one, the engines roared to life, and the group peeled out of the lot, leaving a cloud of dust in their wake. As the last tail light disappeared down the road, Karen let out a slow breath, her fingers relaxing at her sides. She'd won this round, but she knew better than to let her guard down. People like them didn't let things go easily, and something told her they weren't done testing her. Karen returned to her patrol car, her mind already running through the next steps. She'd file her report, keep an eye on the area, and make sure she was ready for whatever came next. Because in her line of work, trouble had a way of circling back, and Karen Blake was always prepared to meet it head on. Karen spent a few minutes in her car after the bikers left, jotting down notes. Their leader had confidence, sure, but it was the kind of confidence built on fear, not respect. That made him dangerous. It also meant that if she could crack his control over the group, the rest would fold like a house of cards. The sound of crickets filled the night as she started her engine and began her route again. She could still feel the faint adrenaline coursing through her veins, a reminder of the delicate line she'd just walked. Encounters like that were a test of more than just training, they demanded instinct and composure. She radioed in the situation, describing the incident and the bikers' general direction of travel. No backup needed for now, she concluded. Just a heads up in case they cause more trouble tonight. Dispatch acknowledged her report, and Karen resumed her patrol. The roads were quieter now, most residents already tucked into their homes. She passed a few late-night stragglers, a couple walking their dog, a delivery driver pulling out of a fast food joint. Normal people, going about their lives exactly the kind of peace she worked hard to protect. But Karen couldn't shake the feeling that the night wasn't over yet. About an hour later, as Karen was looping back toward the town center, a call crackled through her radio. Attention all units, report of multiple motorcycles speeding on County Road 18, heading east. Witnesses report reckless driving and harassment of other vehicles. Any units in the vicinity? Karen grabbed her radio. Unit 423 responding. I'm about 5 minutes out. 10-4, 423. Be advised, caller mentioned possible road rage incidents. Proceed with caution. Karen's jaw tightened. She knew exactly who it was before she even hit the siren. She turned onto County Road 18, a long stretch of highway bordered by dense trees on both sides. It was dark, the overhead lights spaced far apart, leaving long shadows across the asphalt. She pushed her patrol car a little faster, the hum of the engine steady as she scanned the road ahead. In the distance, she spotted them. A cluster of motorcycles, their tail lights glowing like red fireflies in the night. They were spread across both lanes, weaving dangerously close to a small sedan that was trying to pass. Karen flipped on her lights and siren, her voice firm as she called into her loudspeaker. This is Sergeant Karen Blake with the Rivertown Police Department. Pull over to the side of the road immediately. The bikers hesitated, their movements faltering as they looked over their shoulders. Karen could see the driver of the sedan gripping the wheel tightly, clearly terrified. The leader, she recognized him, instantly raised his hand, signaling his crew. One by one, they peeled off to the shoulder, their engines rumbling as they came to a stop. Karen followed, parking her car at an angle behind them to block the lane. She stepped out, her flashlight cutting through the darkness as she approached. The leader sat astride his bike, watching her with a smug expression. Well, if it isn't our favorite officer, he drawled. What brings you out here tonight, Sergeant? Karen ignored the bait. She addressed the group as a whole, her voice calm but authoritative. You were reported for reckless driving and endangering other motorists. Step off your bikes and line up on the shoulder. One of the younger bikers laughed nervously. Come on, lady, it's just a little fun. No one got hurt. Karen's gaze snapped to him, sharp and unyielding. Step off the bike, she repeated, her tone leaving no room for argument. Reluctantly, they obeyed. One by one, they dismounted, their boots crunching on the gravel. Karen kept her flashlight steady, her other hand resting casually near her holster. She could feel the tension in the air, the unspoken challenge hanging between her and the leader. Let's make this quick, the leader said, crossing his arms. We've got places to be. Karen arched an eyebrow. You'll be free to leave once I've checked your licenses, registration, and run your plates. The leader chuckled, but it was a hollow sound. You like making things difficult, don't you? Karen didn't respond. She started with the youngest biker, taking his ID and scanning it under the flashlight. He avoided her gaze, shifting nervously from foot to foot. "Any reason you were harassing that sedan back there?" she asked, keeping her tone neutral. He stammered, glancing toward the leader before mumbling, "I wasn't trying to harass anyone. Just messing around." Karen nodded, jotting down a note. "Messing around can get people killed," she said simply. "You might want to think about that." She moved down the line, repeating the process. Most of the bikers were cooperative, though clearly irritated. But when she reached the leader, he didn't hand over his ID right away. "Got something to prove tonight?" he asked, his tone laced with condescension. Karen met his gaze, unflinching. "The only thing I'm proving is that everyone follows the law. Even you." The leader smirked, finally pulling out his wallet and tossing his ID at her feet. "There you go, Sergeant. Knock yourself out." Karen bent down slowly, picking up the card without breaking eye contact. Her patience was wearing thin, but she refused to let him see it. As she ran his information, a new thought crossed her mind. This wasn't just about a group of bikers being reckless. The leader's behavior hinted at something deeper, something he was trying to protect or hide. Her suspicions were confirmed when she returned to him. "Your license is expired," she said, holding up the card. "You're not legally allowed to operate this motorcycle." The leader's smirk disappeared. "That's ridiculous," he snapped. "It's not expired." Karen tapped the card. "Check the date. You're 3 months overdue." The other bikers exchanged uneasy glances. Karen could see the cracks forming in the leader's facade, his confidence starting to waver. "You've got 2 options," she said evenly. "Call someone to pick up the bike, or I have it impounded. Your choice." For a moment, it looked like he might argue. But then he stepped back, his jaw tight with barely concealed anger. "Fine," he muttered. "You win this round." Karen didn't respond. She watched as he pulled out his phone, barking orders to someone on the other end of the line. As the night wore on, the bikers grew quieter, their earlier bravado replaced by simmering frustration. Karen stood her ground, unwavering, until every bike was accounted for and the road was clear again. When the last of them finally roared off into the night, Karen returned to her patrol car. She knew this wasn't the end. The leader's parting glare had said it all: they'd be back, and they'd be looking for payback. Karen sat behind the wheel, her fingers drumming lightly on the dashboard. Trouble was coming, it was only a matter of time. But Karen Blake didn't back down from trouble. Not now, not ever. Karen leaned back in her seat, watching the bikers' movements from across the gas station parking lot. The leader, his arrogance on full display, swaggered toward the entrance while 2 others leaned against their bikes, laughing loudly and making crude jokes. The youngest in the group lingered at the edge, glancing nervously around as if second-guessing his decision to tag along. She didn't rush. Karen had learned long ago that patience was one of the most powerful tools in her arsenal. Let them believe they were untouchable. Let them dig their own graves. From the corner of her eye, she noticed the gas station clerk, a teenage boy, barely out of high school, fidgeting anxiously behind the counter. The leader barked something at him, and though Karen couldn't hear the words, the way the boy shrank back told her everything she needed to know. Karen picked up her radio and spoke in a low, steady tone. "Unit 423 to dispatch. I'm at the speedway off Route 12. Same group from earlier. They're causing a disturbance." Dispatch responded promptly. "Understood, 423. Backup is en route." Karen smiled faintly. "Perfect." Inside the gas station, the leader grabbed a bag of chips and tore it open without paying. He strutted back outside, munching loudly, and tossed the empty bag onto the ground. The youngest biker hesitated, then picked up the trash and threw it into the bin. Karen caught the exchange and filed it away. Not everyone in this group was fully committed to their antics. She stepped out of her car, her boots crunching against the gravel as she approached. The rumble of engines grew louder as the bikers noticed her, revving their bikes like wild animals marking their territory. Well, the leader called out, his voice dripping with mockery. If it isn't Officer Buzzkill. Come to give us another lecture. Karen kept her expression neutral, her eyes scanning the group. Evening, gentlemen, she said, her tone calm but firm. Having fun tonight? The leader smirked, leaning casually against his bike. You could say that. What's it to you? Karen ignored the jab. The gas station isn't your playground, she said, her voice steady. And littering is still against the law. The leader's smirk widened. Littering? Really? That's what you're worried about? He gestured dramatically at the ground. Come on, officer, we're just having a little fun. No harm done. Karen's gaze flicked to the youngest biker, who shifted uncomfortably under her scrutiny. She could see the cracks forming, the subtle unease spreading through the group. You call harassment fun? Karen asked, taking a step closer. Because that clerk inside doesn't look like he's having much fun right now. The leader's face darkened slightly, but he recovered quickly, laughing it off. You're blowing this way out of proportion. We're just hanging out, same as anyone else. Karen held his gaze, unflinching. That's strike two for you tonight, she said. Don't push your luck. The leader's cocky facade faltered for a split second, and Karen knew she'd hit a nerve. Just as the bikers were starting to stir uneasily, the sound of another patrol car pulling into the lot broke the tension. Officer Ramirez, Karen's trusted partner, stepped out, his presence immediately commanding attention. Everything all right here, Sergeant? Ramirez asked, his tone casual but sharp enough to make the bikers take notice. Just having a friendly chat, Karen replied, her lips curving into a faint smile. The leader scowled, his earlier bravado dampened by the arrival of backup. He threw his hands up in mock surrender. All right. We get it? We'll behave. Karen didn't blink. That's good to hear. But just so we're clear, if I see any of you step out of line again tonight, you won't be getting off with a warning. The leader's smirk returned, but it didn't reach his eyes. Sure thing, officer. We'll be good little boys. Karen and Ramirez stood their ground as the bikers reluctantly mounted their bikes. The leader revved his engine one last time, glaring at Karen before speeding off into the night with his crew in tow. As the dust settled, Karen's eyes drifted to the ground where the group had been standing. A small patch of gravel had been disturbed, revealing a faint glint of metal. She crouched down and picked up a keychain, its charm shaped like a skull. Looks like they left something behind, Ramirez said, walking over. Karen turned the keychain over in her hand, studying it closely. It was ordinary enough at first glance, but the initials etched into the back caught her attention. V.M, she read aloud. Any idea what it means? Ramirez asked. Karen slipped the keychain into her pocket. Not yet. But I've got a feeling it's important. Back at the station, Karen sat at her desk, turning the keychain over in her hand as she sifted through the group's information. She'd run their plates earlier, but most of the bikes came back clean. The leader's expired license had been the only real red flag so far. But Karen couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this group than met the eye. She typed the initials V.M into the database, cross-referencing them with known criminal organizations in the area. Nothing concrete came up, but a few loosely connected names raised her eyebrows. A biker gang with ties to illegal street racing, a local crew suspected of smuggling stolen goods, pieces of a puzzle that didn't quite fit together yet. Working late again. Ramirez's voice broke her concentration. Karen glanced up, a small smile tugging at her lips. "You know me. Can't let a mystery go unsolved." Ramirez leaned against the doorway, his expression serious. "Be careful, Karen. These guys aren't just punks looking for a thrill. There's a lot of chatter about a bigger operation moving through this area. Drugs, weapons, you name it." Karen nodded, slipping the keychain into her desk drawer. "I know. That's why I can't let this go." The next day, Karen returned to the streets, her mind sharper than ever. She wasn't just patrolling now, she was hunting, piecing together the threads of a story that had yet to fully reveal itself. She stopped by the gas station to check on the clerk, who confirmed that the bikers had been harassing him all night. Karen reassured him that she was on top of the situation, but her mind was already racing ahead. Every encounter with the bikers was another chance to gather intel, to learn their patterns and weaknesses. They thought they were invincible, but Karen was patient. She'd let them make the first move, confident that when the time came, she'd be ready. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the town, Karen's patrol car blended into the dark streets. She was the calm before the storm, a force of quiet resolve waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The bikers didn't know it yet, but they were playing right into her hands. Karen's nights became a blend of routine patrols and calculated observations. She wasn't tailing the bikers outright, not yet. Instead, she was building a profile. Every taunt, every reckless stunt, every gas station visit, they weren't just incidents, they were data points in a story that was beginning to take shape. She spent her downtime at the station reviewing surveillance footage, speaking with shop owners, and even combing through social media posts. The gang had a presence online, albeit a sloppy one. Self-congratulatory videos of their stunts popped up regularly, giving Karen a clearer sense of their hierarchy. The leader, who called himself Reaper, was as arrogant as they came. His posts were full of bravado, but Karen noted the recurring tags for certain locations. They weren't just random hangouts, they were consistent meeting spots. It was a breadcrumb trail, and Karen was determined to follow it. One evening, as Karen cruised down a quiet stretch of highway, the familiar roar of motorcycles broke the stillness. She checked her rearview mirror and spotted the gang approaching. "Here we go," she muttered, her pulse steady. The bikers swarmed around her patrol car, their engines growling like predators circling prey. One of them, a wiry man with a snake tattoo coiled around his neck, pulled alongside her window. "Out for a joyride, officer," he sneered, his voice barely audible over the roar of the bikes. Karen didn't react, her face a mask of calm. She glanced at the speedometer, 47 mph. They were baiting her, trying to get her to make a move. Reaper, riding at the front, glanced back with a cocky grin. He signaled to the others, and they surged ahead, accelerating dangerously. Karen watched them disappear into the distance, her hands tightening on the wheel. She didn't chase them. Not yet. Instead, she pulled over to the shoulder and radioed their direction to nearby units. "This isn't a race," she reminded herself. "It's a game of patience." Karen's steady approach was paying off. During her routine stops at local businesses, she overheard whispers about the youngest member of the gang. The boy, barely out of his teens, was called Jenks. "He's not like the others," a mechanic confided to Karen one afternoon. "Kid's got a good head on his shoulders, but he's in over his head with that crew. I've seen him hesitate when the others pull their stunts." Karen nodded, filing the information away. A weak link could become a valuable ally if approached correctly. She started paying closer attention to Jenks during their encounters. He rarely joined in the taunting, and his body language betrayed his unease. Karen saw it in the way he lingered at the back of the group, his glances darting nervously whenever things escalated. One night, after the bikers dispersed from their usual hangout, Karen followed Jenks from a distance. He rode slower than the others, his posture tense. When he pulled into a quiet neighborhood and parked in front of a modest house, Karen made a mental note of the address. Everyone's got a story, she thought. Time to find his. Karen's investigation began uncovering more than she'd expected. The keychain with the initials V.M turned out to be linked to a local repair shop known for its connections to illegal activities. The owner, Victor Martinez, had a rap sheet that included charges for smuggling and illegal weapons distribution. She dug deeper, cross-referencing the gang's movements with Martinez's known associates. A pattern began to emerge. The bikers weren't just a group of thrill-seekers, they were runners, transporting goods for Martinez under the guise of reckless joyrides. Karen leaned back in her chair, staring at the map pinned to her office wall. Red circles marked the gang's favorite hangouts, while blue lines traced their routes. Martinez's shop sat squarely at the intersection of several paths. "This isn't just about intimidation," she murmured. "They're moving something, and they're doing it right under our noses." Karen decided to test her theory. She stationed herself near one of the gang's known routes, parking her patrol car out of sight. It wasn't long before she heard the unmistakable growl of motorcycles approaching. The bikers flew past her hiding spot, and Karen's sharp eyes caught a subtle exchange. A package passed from one rider to another mid-ride. "Gotcha," she whispered, pulling out onto the road to follow them at a distance. She kept her lights off, staying just close enough to track their movements. The gang weaved through side streets before splitting up. Karen chose to follow Reaper, who carried the package. He led her to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. Karen parked a safe distance away and watched as he handed the package to a man waiting in the shadows. Karen snapped a few photos with her phone, her heart racing. This was the proof she needed. Karen knew she couldn't take down the gang alone, not yet. She needed to sow discord among them, to exploit the cracks in their foundation. She began targeting Jinx, subtly but deliberately. During one of their encounters, she pulled him aside under the pretense of a routine check. "You're better than this," she said quietly, her tone devoid of judgment. Jinx frowned, his defenses rising. "I don't know what you're talking about." "You know exactly what I'm talking about," Karen replied, her eyes steady on his. "This isn't who you are. And when this all falls apart, and it will, you'll be the one left holding the bag." Jinx looked away, his jaw tightening. Karen didn't push further. She'd planted the seed. Now, she just had to wait for it to grow. A few nights later, Karen's patience was rewarded. While on patrol, she spotted Jinx alone at a diner, his helmet resting on the table beside him. She parked her car and walked in, ordering a coffee before sitting at the counter. She didn't approach him directly, but her presence was enough. After a few minutes, Jinx stood and walked over to her. "What do you want from me?" he asked, his voice low but tinged with desperation. Karen looked up, her expression calm. "The truth." Jinx hesitated, his hands fidgeting. "If I talk, they'll come after me." "They won't have the chance," Karen said firmly. "But you have to trust me." For a long moment, Jinx said nothing. Then, with a resigned sigh, he nodded. With Jinx's help, Karen began piecing together the gang's operations in greater detail. He confirmed her suspicions about Martinez and revealed the gang's next drop-off location. Karen relayed the information to her team, carefully coordinating a plan to intercept the bikers without putting Jinx in danger. The stage was set. The gang was about to learn the hard way that Karen Blake wasn't just another small-town cop. The gang was back on the road, tearing down the main highway like it was their personal racetrack. The roar of their bikes echoed through the night, a thunderous symphony of arrogance and chaos. They laughed and hollered, drunk on the thrill of their latest stunt. Reaper, at the front, raised a hand in triumph, the small package they'd just delivered already forgotten in his mind. They thought they were untouchable. They thought no one could stop them. And then, the night erupted in the unmistakable wail of a siren. Karen's patrol car emerged from the shadows, her blue and red lights slicing through the darkness. She wasn't just following them, she was chasing with a precision and determination that none of them had ever seen before. Reaper glanced back, his grin faltering. It's her again. The cop who doesn't know when to quit. She's crazy if she thinks she can take us, one of the bikers shouted, revving his engine. But Karen wasn't playing their game anymore. This wasn't just about catching a reckless group of bikers. This was the moment she'd been preparing for, the culmination of every calculated move she'd made. She picked up her radio, her voice calm but firm. This is Sergeant Karen Blake. Pursuit in progress. Units, hold your positions. I'll handle this. The gang split up, scattering like a pack of wolves trying to confuse their prey. But Karen was ready for them. She'd studied their routes, their habits, their every move. She anticipated their split and made her choice. Reaper. Her car surged forward, the engine roaring as she zeroed in on the gang's leader. The other bikers would be dealt with later. Reaper was the heart of the operation, the one who thought he was untouchable. He pushed his bike harder, the wind whipping past his face as he darted onto a winding back road. Trees loomed on either side, the moonlight casting jagged shadows across the pavement. Karen followed without hesitation, her driving precise and controlled. Her tires hugged the curves of the road as if the car was an extension of her will. Reaper glanced back, his confidence beginning to crack. What the hell is with this cop, he muttered, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the handlebars. Karen didn't give him time to think. She flicked a switch, activating the loudspeaker. Her voice boomed over the roar of the engines. Pull over now, Reaper. You've run out of road. Reaper didn't listen. He never listened. He twisted the throttle, pushing his bike to its limits. But Karen had spent years training for moments like this, moments where precision, patience, and unshakable focus made the difference. As Reaper sped toward a narrow bridge, Karen executed a move most wouldn't dare attempt. She accelerated and pulled alongside him, her car nudging just close enough to disrupt his balance. Back off. Reaper snarled, swerving to maintain control. Karen didn't flinch. With a calculated swerve, she forced him closer to the edge of the bridge. The rumble of the bike faltered as Reaper realized he had no more room to maneuver. He skidded to a stop, his tires screeching against the pavement. Karen brought her car to a halt just ahead of him, stepping out with a calmness that belied the intensity of the moment. Reaper glared at her, his chest heaving. You don't know who you're messing with, lady. Karen raised an eyebrow, her hand resting on the holster at her hip. Funny, I was about to say the same thing. Before Reaper could react, Karen's backup arrived. Patrol cars surrounded the area, their lights casting an eerie glow over the scene. Officers emerged, weapons drawn, but Karen held up a hand to stop them. This one's mine, she said, her voice steady. Reaper sneered, trying to hide the fear creeping into his eyes. You think you've won? You've got nothing on me. Karen smirked. Oh, I've got plenty. You've been sloppy, Reaper. Real sloppy. Your little delivery runs. I've got them all documented. The videos your crew posted online? Evidence. And your buddy Martinez? Let's just say he's not as loyal as you think. Reaper's face paled. You're bluffing. Karen stepped closer, her eyes locking onto his. You've been underestimating me from the start. That was your first mistake. Your second? Thinking you could outsmart me. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone, showing him a live feed. It was Martinez, handcuffed and being loaded into a squad car. Reaper's bravado shattered. He looked around, realizing the trap had been set long before he even got on his bike that night. You, he started, but the words failed him. Karen leaned in, her voice low enough for only him to hear. Game over. The rest of the gang didn't fare any better. Karen's team swept through the town, intercepting the other bikers at every turn. By the end of the night, every single member of the gang was in custody. As Reaper was escorted into the back of a patrol car, he turned to Karen one last time. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice a mix of anger and disbelief. Karen crossed her arms, a small smile playing on her lips. "Just a small town cop, right?" The town of Rivertown woke up the next morning to the news of the gang's takedown. For months, they'd been terrorized by the bikers, and now, they could finally breathe easy. Karen stood by her patrol car, watching as the last of the gang was driven away. The satisfaction of a job well done settled over her, but she knew this wasn't the end. There would always be another challenge, another fight to win. But for now, Rivertown was safe. One of her colleagues approached, clapping her on the shoulder. "You really outdid yourself, Blake. How'd you pull it off?" Karen shrugged, her expression calm. "Patience. Planning. And a little bit of luck." She glanced down the empty road, the first rays of sunlight breaking through the horizon. For the first time in weeks, the streets were quiet. Peaceful. Karen got back into her car, the engine purring to life. As she drove away, she allowed herself a small smile. Sometimes, the underestimated ones are the most dangerous of all. The distant sound of engines sputtering into silence filled the air as the last of the bikers were intercepted and restrained. But the tension around Reaper was still palpable, like the calm before a final storm. Karen could sense it in his defiance, the way he clenched his fists even in cuffs, refusing to accept that his reign of terror had ended. Karen gestured toward one of the backup officers. "Secure the evidence." An officer approached her with a small duffel bag, carefully sealed and tagged. Reaper's eyes darted toward it, his tough guy facade cracking just a little. "What's in there, huh? Something you forgot to mention during your little joyride?" Karen asked, her tone sharp but measured. Reaper stayed silent, his jaw tight. Karen unzipped the bag just enough to show its contents, a package of what looked like innocuous electronics. But Karen had done her homework. She knew these weren't just parts, they were components used to modify bikes for illegal street races and evade radar detection. "Custom modifications," Karen said, raising an eyebrow. "Not exactly legal. And let me guess, these weren't just for your own bikes. Selling to other gangs? Smuggling them out of state?" Reaper's silence spoke volumes, but his eyes burned with anger. "You've got nothing," he muttered finally. "These are just bike parts. You can't prove anything." Karen smirked, pulling out her phone again. She tapped on a recording, and a familiar voice played through the speakers. "Yeah, Reaper's crew runs those mods out of the shop downtown. He keeps the money hidden in a safe under the workbench. Code's 4189. The voice belonged to Martinez. Reaper's face twisted in fury. "That traitor." Karen shrugged. Funny how loyalty fades when faced with years in prison. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "But let me tell you what's really interesting, Reaper. It's not just the modifications. We've got footage of your crew moving more than bike parts, narcotics, stolen goods, even weapons. You've been building an empire, and you thought nobody would notice." Reaper's bravado crumbled entirely. He slumped in his cuffs, muttering curses under his breath. Karen stepped back, letting the weight of his downfall settle. She didn't need to rub it in, justice spoke for itself. While Karen oversaw the bikers being loaded into patrol cars, one of her sergeants approached her, clipboard in hand. "Looks like we've got enough evidence to keep them off the streets for a long time," he said. "Great work, Blake. You sure know how to handle yourself." Karen nodded, her eyes scanning the scene. She'd done her job, but she wasn't one to bask in praise. Just glad we got them before someone else got hurt, she said simply. Reaper, now sitting in the back of a squad car, glared at her through the glass. He banged on the window, shouting something unintelligible. Karen turned to face him, her expression unreadable. For a moment, it seemed like he might try one last act of defiance. But then his shoulders sagged, and he leaned back, defeated. Karen tapped on the window. Get comfortable, Reaper. You've got a long ride ahead. The aftermath of the operation rippled through Rivertown. News spread quickly within hours, everyone knew about the gang's takedown. Local businesses reopened their doors without fear of intimidation, and families returned to the streets without glancing over their shoulders. Karen's phone buzzed non-stop with messages of gratitude from residents. She read each one with a quiet sense of pride but didn't linger on the praise. For her, this wasn't about recognition. It was about restoring the sense of safety her town deserved. At the precinct, officers reviewed the case files, marveling at the sheer amount of evidence Karen had gathered. How long have you been building this case? One officer asked. Karen leaned back in her chair, sipping her coffee. Long enough, she replied with a small smile. Later that evening, Karen sat in her patrol car parked by the river. The water shimmered under the moonlight, the town's skyline reflected in its surface. It was a rare moment of peace, a chance to breathe after the chaos. Her radio crackled with a routine report, nothing urgent, nothing that required her immediate attention. She leaned back in her seat, allowing herself a brief moment of reflection. She thought about the bikers, the way they'd underestimated her from the start. They saw her as just another cop, someone they could intimidate and outsmart. But Karen had proved them wrong. A knock on her window startled her. She rolled it down to see a local shop owner, an older man with a kind smile. I just wanted to thank you, Sergeant, he said. We've been living in fear for too long. What you did tonight, it means everything to us. Karen nodded, her expression softening. Just doing my job, she said. The man nodded and walked away, leaving Karen alone with her thoughts once more. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy. Karen knew that. There would always be more challenges, more threats to the peace she worked so hard to protect. But tonight, she allowed herself to feel the weight of her success. She wasn't just a small-town cop. She was a protector, a strategist, and a force to be reckoned with. As the night stretched on, Karen started her car and drove through the quiet streets of Rivertown. For now, at least, the town was safe. And that was enough. Sometimes, the quiet ones are the most dangerous. And those who underestimate them, they never see it coming. The fluorescent lights of the station flickered softly as Karen typed her report with calm precision. Every detail of the night, every reckless turn, every taunt, every act of defiance was documented. She made sure the case was airtight. Across the room, the bikers sat in a holding cell, their bravado drained. Reaper, who had been so loud and confident earlier, now sat with his head in his hands. The others shifted uncomfortably, casting wary glances at each other, as if realizing they'd underestimated the situation and Karen. Detectives combed through the evidence Karen had collected. The duffel bag of illegal parts, the footage from nearby surveillance cameras, and even the recordings from Karen's body cam painted a clear picture. The bikers weren't just a nuisance. They were a threat to public safety, tied to illegal street races, smuggling, and more. The chief leaned over Karen's shoulder, reviewing the report. This is solid, he said. You didn't miss a thing. Karen nodded. They thought they could push boundaries without consequences. It's time they face the law. The chief chuckled, a rare sound from the usually stern man. You've done more than that. You've sent a message loud and clear. These streets aren't theirs to own. By morning, the bikers had been booked, and the charges piled up like a mountain they couldn't climb over. Reckless endangerment, resisting arrest, illegal modifications, and possession of contraband were just the tip of the iceberg. Reaper, who had spent the night pacing his cell, finally broke his silence when Karen walked past. "This isn't over," he muttered, his voice low and venomous. Karen paused, turning to meet his glare with an unshaken gaze. "You're right," she said. "It's just beginning. But not for me, for you." His bravado faltered, and he sank back onto the bench. Karen didn't linger. She had seen men like him before, full of bluster until the weight of justice came crashing down. News of the gang's takedown spread quickly through Rivertown. The morning papers hailed Karen as a hero, with headlines like "Biker Gang Brought to Justice" and "Small Town Officer Takes Down Big Time Trouble." Local shop owners, many of whom had suffered harassment from the gang, expressed their relief openly. A bakery owner whose windows had been smashed by the bikers brought a basket of fresh pastries to the station. "For you and your team," she said with a warm smile. Karen accepted the gesture with a quiet thank you, though she insisted the team share the credit. She had never been one for the limelight. Her focus remained on keeping the streets safe, not basking in glory. Inside the precinct, the atmosphere had shifted. Officers who once underestimated Karen now spoke about her with a newfound respect. "Blake," one of them called out as she passed. "How'd you pull it off? Heard you didn't even flinch when Reaper tried to intimidate you." Karen shrugged. "He thought his size and his crew made him untouchable. I just showed him he was wrong." Another officer chimed in, "You've got nerves of steel, Blake. Remind me never to get on your bad side." Karen offered a rare smile, but her response was measured. "It's not about nerves. It's about being prepared and knowing when to act. That's what keeps you safe out there." As the days passed, the streets of Rivertown grew quieter. The absence of the gang's roaring motorcycles was a welcome change, and residents began to feel a renewed sense of safety. Parents let their children play outside without constant supervision. Small businesses flourished without fear of intimidation. Even rival gangs seemed to take notice. Rumors circulated that Rivertown wasn't a place to mess with anymore, thanks to one no-nonsense officer who had set a precedent. Karen's name became synonymous with resilience and justice, but she didn't let it go to her head. She knew this was just one battle in a larger war to keep her town safe. Late one evening, Karen found herself back at the gas station where it all began. The neon sign buzzed faintly above her as she leaned against her patrol car, sipping a cup of coffee. The clerk, a young man who had been on duty the night of the confrontation, stepped outside. "Hey, Sergeant Blake," he said hesitantly. Karen looked up and nodded. "How's it going?" "Better," he admitted. "A lot better since those guys are gone. I just wanted to say thanks. You didn't have to step in that night, but you did. And it made all the difference." Karen gave him a small smile. "It's my job," she said simply. The clerk hesitated, then added, "Yeah, but not everyone would have handled it like you did. You're different." Karen nodded thoughtfully, her gaze drifting toward the horizon. "Sometimes, doing the right thing means standing your ground, even when it's tough. But it's worth it." Weeks later, the bikers' trial began. The prosecution, armed with Karen's meticulous evidence, presented an airtight case. Witnesses came forward to describe the gang's reign of intimidation, while surveillance footage and recovered contraband painted a damning picture. The verdicts were swift and decisive, guilty on multiple counts for each member. Reaper, the leader, faced the harshest sentence. His defiant smirk was gone as he was led out of the courtroom in shackles. Karen didn't attend the sentencing, she didn't need to. For her, justice wasn't about watching the fall, it was about knowing the streets were safer for the people who lived there. As the chapter closed, Rivertown began to heal. Karen's actions had done more than take down a gang, they had reminded the town that strength comes in many forms. A new officer, fresh out of the academy, approached Karen one day, eager to learn. "How did you stay so calm during all of that?" she asked, wide-eyed. Karen thought for a moment before responding. "Calm isn't about not feeling pressure. It's about trusting yourself to handle it. Preparation and focus, that's what keeps you steady." The young officer nodded, absorbing the wisdom. Karen offered her a rare smile. "Just remember, people will always underestimate you. Let them. It makes proving them wrong all the more satisfying." The streets of Rivertown had returned to their peaceful rhythm, but Karen remained vigilant. She knew her work was never truly done, and that was fine by her. As she drove through the town she'd sworn to protect, she reflected on the events that had unfolded. They weren't just about taking down a gang, they were about proving that integrity and quiet strength could outmatch arrogance and intimidation every time. And so, Rivertown thrived, its quiet protector ensuring it stayed that way. For Karen Blake, the real reward wasn't the recognition or the accolades. It was knowing that, for now, justice had been served and that she was ready for whatever came next. Sometimes, justice doesn't roar. Sometimes, it moves quietly, decisively, and leaves its mark where it matters most. The days following the bikers' trial, the town of Rivertown seemed to have changed. People walked with a little more confidence, spoke a little louder, and smiled a little brighter. The absence of the gang had done more than just remove a threat, it had sparked something in the community. They had seen how one person's quiet strength could bring about real change, and it inspired them in ways they hadn't expected. For Karen, though, the changes were subtle. She didn't need the adulation or the recognition. Her work was always about something deeper, something more personal. The mission had always been to keep people safe and to uphold justice, nothing more, nothing less. Karen sat at her desk one morning, sipping her coffee, as the hum of the precinct buzzed around her. Officers came and went, talking about their shifts and their families, joking and laughing as usual. But in the middle of it all, Karen remained calm, her focus sharp. She knew that this wasn't just about enforcing laws. It was about something bigger, teaching people that true power often comes not from the loudest voices, but from the quietest actions. She had seen it time and time again, people who assumed they had all the answers, people who spoke too loudly and acted with arrogance. But it was always the quiet ones, the ones who listened more than they spoke, who surprised everyone. In her career, Karen had learned this truth: when people underestimate you, it gives you the power to show them just how wrong they were. The young officer who had asked her how she stayed so calm. Karen thought of her often. It was easy for people to mistake calmness for weakness. After all, in a world that seemed obsessed with noise, with speed, and with drama, patience often felt out of place. But that's exactly what made it so powerful. It's not about avoiding conflict, it's about knowing when to confront it and when to let it play out. For Karen, it was about seeing the bigger picture. She didn't react out of emotion. She didn't let anger or frustration cloud her judgment. She was prepared, always. Every move she made, every decision she took, had been thought through carefully. That night with the bikers, it wasn't just about catching them, it was about showing them that their actions would not be tolerated. But more than that, it was about proving that respect is not something you demand, it's something you earn. In the days after the bikers were arrested, Rivertown changed. People who had always kept their heads down, who avoided confrontation, now walked with their heads held a little higher. They had seen what happened when someone stood their ground quietly, calmly, but with firm resolve, and they realized they could do the same. A woman who ran a small local cafe thanked Karen one day. "I've been afraid of them for so long," she said, her voice trembling a little. "But after what you did, I realized I don't have to be afraid anymore." Her words were simple, but they carried weight. It wasn't just about the bikers. It was about the power of standing up for what's right. It was about finding strength in the face of fear and intimidation. It was about showing that one act of courage can ripple through a community, bringing about change where it's needed most. Karen thought back to the moment when she first entered the precinct after the confrontation with the bikers. The chief had nodded at her with approval. It wasn't the first time she had earned the respect of her colleagues, but this moment felt different. It wasn't about her accomplishments, it was about the message that her actions sent. Her calm, composed handling of the situation wasn't just impressive, it was an example of resilience. Resilience wasn't always about being the loudest or the toughest. Sometimes, it was about maintaining your composure when the world around you seemed chaotic. It was about knowing what you stood for, even when others tried to shake you. There would always be more challenges. There would always be more tough situations that required Karen to rise above. But each one, whether big or small, had something to teach her. The bikers had underestimated her. They had thought that because she was a woman, a small-town cop, that she would fold under pressure. They had made the mistake of judging her by her appearance, by her quiet demeanor. And in the end, they were the ones who had been surprised. The true measure of strength, Karen knew, wasn't in how loud you could shout or how big you could appear, it was in how steady you could remain when the pressure was on. It was in your ability to keep going when others might give up. Karen thought about the bikers again. When they first saw her, they had sneered. They thought she was weak, just a cop doing her job in a small town. But by the time they were arrested, they had seen her for who she really was. They had seen the quiet determination, the courage, the preparation. They had learned that the ones they underestimated were often the ones they should have feared the most. Sometimes, respect isn't given, Karen said quietly to herself as she looked out the window. It's earned. And those who underestimated her, who underestimated the quiet strength of others, were the ones who never saw it coming. As the weeks passed, Karen continued to patrol the streets of Rivertown. The bikers were gone, but their presence still lingered in the memories of the people they had terrorized. What Karen had done wasn't just about taking down a gang, it was about showing Rivertown that strength doesn't always announce itself. It doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it whispers. Sometimes, it's steady. And when it finally makes its move, it's unstoppable. The young officer who had asked Karen how she stayed calm now approached her more often. She wanted to learn, wanted to understand how to be both tough and composed, how to face each challenge head-on without losing her cool. Karen gave her the same advice she had always given herself: don't try to be someone you're not. Focus on what matters, and stay true to that. Karen's story wasn't just about the bikers. It wasn't even just about her. It was about a community coming together, about the power of resilience, and about the quiet strength that so many overlook. The world, at times, may feel like it rewards noise, power, and showmanship. But in the end, the ones who make the biggest impact are often those who don't shout about it. They just do what needs to be done, and they do it well. So, the next time someone underestimates you, or someone tells you that you can't make a difference, remember Karen Blake. And remember that true strength doesn't always come from standing out in the crowd. Sometimes, it comes from quietly standing your ground, knowing that you are exactly where you need to be. Sometimes, respect isn't given, it's earned. And those who underestimate the quiet strength of others, they're the ones who never see it coming.